Good morning. Today I'm going to read from a book by the very first writer I ever met in person. This was Richard Brautigan. Trout Fishing in America is the book. A friend of mine got a job one summer working for Richard Brautigan in Paradise Valley, Montana, where he spent much of the latter years of his life. My friend Steve Klingman worked for him, and his job was basically to go fishing with him and to make sure he had enough whiskey. Brautigan's life, of course, was fairly tragic. He was a victim of abuse and alcohol addiction. And I think it impacted his writing a lot. When you read his earlier stuff, it's way more vibrant and cohesive than his later books. And this one just really knocked me out when I first read it. It was so unique, and his whole approach to storytelling was just sort of playful and very different from anything I'd ever read before. So this is the first few sections from Trout Fishing in America. And if you've never read it, Trout Fishing in America is actually not about trout fishing at all. Knock on Wood, Part 1. As a child, when did I first hear about trout fishing in America? From whom? I guess it was a stepfather of mine. Summer of 1942, the old drunk told me about trout fishing. When he could talk, he had a way of describing trout as if they were a precious and intelligent metal. Silver is not a good adjective to describe what I felt when he told me about trout fishing. I'd like to get it right. Maybe trout steel made from trout. The clear, snow-filled river acting as foundry and heat. Imagine Pittsburgh. A steel that comes from trout used to make buildings, trains, and tunnels. The Andrew Carnegie of trout. The reply of trout fishing in America. I remember with particular amusement people with three-cornered hats fishing in the dawn. Knock on Wood, Part 2. One spring afternoon as a child in the strange town of Portland, I walked down to a different street corner and saw a row of old houses huddled together like seals on a rock. Then there was a long field that came sloping down off a hill. The field was covered with green grass and bushes. On top of the hill, there was a grove of tall, dark trees. At a distance, I saw a waterfall come pouring down off the hill. It was long and white, and I could almost feel its cold spray. There must be a creek there, I thought, and it probably has trout in it. Trout. At last an opportunity to go trout fishing, to catch my first trout, to behold Pittsburgh. It was growing dark. I didn't have time to go and look at the creek. I walked home past the glass whiskers of the houses, reflecting the downward rushing waterfalls of night. The next day, I would go trout fishing for the first time. I would get up early and eat my breakfast and go. I had heard that it was better to go trout fishing early in the morning. The trout were better for it. They had something extra in the morning. I went home to prepare for trout fishing in America. I didn't have a fishing tackle, so I had to fall back on corny fishing tackle, like a joke. Why did the chicken cross the road? I bent a pin and tied it onto a piece of white string and slept. The next morning I got up early and ate my breakfast. I took a slice of white bread to use for bait. I planned on making dough balls from the soft center of the bread and putting them on my vaudevillian hook. I left the place and walked down to the different street corner. How beautiful the field looked, and the creek that came pouring down in a waterfall off the hill. But as I got closer to the creek, I could see that something was wrong. The creek did not act right. There was a strangeness to it. There was a thing about its motion that was wrong. Finally, I got close enough to see what the trouble was. The waterfall was just a flight of white wooden stairs leading up to a house in the trees. I stood there for a long time, looking up and looking down, following the stairs with my eyes, having trouble believing. Then I knocked on my creek and heard the sound of wood.